This is the most insightful book about money that I've read in a long time. Because in a space where people are constantly talking about you need this percentage of this, or you need this many months of this, or 50, 30, 20, or whatever, there is not a single numerical prescription in this book. And despite the title, this isn't really like a pop science book of like, here's all the things we did in a lab. Financial success is not a hard science. It's a soft skill, where how you behave is more important than what you know. I call this soft skill the psychology of money. Knowing what to do tells you nothing about what happens in your head when you try to do it. And dare I say, I think Morgan here hits the mark. So let's talk about this book. I'm Ben, and this is Sketchy Advice. I already flipped the book, so it's still sketchy advice. I'm just not flipping it right now. You can't tell me what to do. Now, Morgan Housel is not the first person to point out that money tends to be more about what we believe and feel and our habits and how we behave than it is about interest rates or market activity or any of that stuff. But a lot of the people in the mainstream who point that out then tend to pivot to an approach that looks like this.
That's stupid. It's stupid on steroids. Credit cards, stupid. Stupid. And they're using loans like a rat in a wheel, running on steroids. Have a clue by borrowing now. Money on your house to put granite countertops in. Think.
What you do with your money stops being like a financial or economic decision, and it starts being a reflection of your moral character or your intelligence. And it gets pretty old pretty fast. But bless Morgan Housel, for a book that is giving you a ton of advice, he approaches this with so much humility. I can't tell you what to do with your money because I don't know you. I don't know what you want. I don't know when you want it. I don't know why you want it. So I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. I love this approach. Rather than saying, look, I'm rich and successful and I know things, so you have to follow my advice. And if you don't follow my advice, you're dumb and bad and irresponsible. He just says, listen, these are things we know about humans and money, and you should think about how that applies to your situation.
Hi, everybody. Editing Ben coming to you from my editing closet in my home. As I was putting this video together, I realized that some people probably are wanting and expecting me to kind of go through each one of Morgan's points point by point. He has like 20 lessons in this book. I don't do that in this video for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of his points are about investing. And I think his advice is valuable and good, but it's just not really my lane personally on this channel. The second is that like I actually think you should go read this book. I think you should check it out from your library or buy it or whatever. When I review books that have quite bad advice, I often see my main duty is to save you time. But in this case, I think this is a book you should actually read, which is why I'm kind of looking more at like, what is Morgan's approach? Why do I think that approach is valuable and worth your time? So just to let you know, that's where I'm coming from with this video. If you want like basic summaries of his book, there are loads on YouTube, but honestly, he's a good writer. He's got good things to say. It's not that long of a book, worth a read. So there you go.
For instance, one of the great debates of personal finance is what is the most effective way to pay off debt? You have the debt snowball method, where you're paying off the smallest debt first and then moving to progressively bigger debts until you're done. And then you have the debt avalanche method, where you pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first and then move down to progressively lower interest rates. Now, when you watch kind of clickbaity videos about this that are like, here's why you shouldn't do the debt snowball, what they'll basically say is that the debt avalanche saves you more money because you're paying less interest on that plan than with the debt snowball. And that's true. That's just objectively true. But Morgan makes the argument that when you're looking at financial decisions, you shouldn't just settle on what's the most mathematically optimal. Quote, what's often overlooked in finance is that something can be technically true, but contextually nonsense. For instance, there was a study that came out of Yale in 2008 that basically recommended that young investors would do better in retirement if they borrowed money to put into their retirement at a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every one of your own dollars you're putting in 2 borrowed dollars. Which makes sense because of how compounding works. Having 3 times as much money earlier when you're younger, those returns are going to dwarf whatever you have to pay back as long as you're kind of tapering off how much money you borrow over time. Quote, the math works on paper. It's a rational strategy, but it's almost absurdly unreasonable. No normal person could watch 100% of their retirement account evaporate and be so unfazed that they carry on with the strategy undeterred. Because yeah, if most of the money in your retirement account is borrowed and you see a huge dip, suddenly you don't have any money, you just owe money. A mathematically rational strategy is no good if your human brain is unable to stick with it. Which is probably why this study found that on average, people who use the debt snowball method are more successful at paying down debt. Because it seems like a lot of people get more satisfaction from actually watching debts disappear than just knowing theoretically that they're going to be saving more money by paying down interest. That's not rational, but it is how a lot of us function. I say that as someone who got out of debt primarily using the debt avalanche method. That method was reasonable for me. But that doesn't mean it's going to be reasonable for you. Because what's reasonable for you depends a lot on how you personally operate. And, according to Morgan, what you've lived through. At the beginning of each chapter, you get the title and then kind of this one sentence high-level summary, and this first chapter is my favorite. No one's crazy. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.000000001% of what's happened in the world, but maybe 80% of how you think the world works. People who were born in 1950 saw stocks do this, while people who were born in 1970 saw stocks do this. Who do you think is more likely to invest in stocks? In 2006, a pair of economists looked at the data of how people invested their money based on when they were born. And what they found was, quote, that people's lifetime investment decisions are heavily anchored to the experiences those investors had in their own generation, especially experiences early in their adult life. Our findings suggest that individual investors' willingness to bear risk depends on personal history. Morgan talking now. Not intelligence, or education, or sophistication. Just the dumb luck of when and where you were born. Here at YNAB, we talk all the time about how the thing that should be driving what you do with your money is your values and your priorities. But what we maybe don't talk about enough is how our personal stories influence those things and what our expectations are. We need to look back at our own stories, the things that we absorbed from watching our parents or watching the world around us, to get a better sense of why do we feel a certain way about debt or investing or saving, because our stories are going to have an influence on what is reasonable for us to do. The last chapter of Morgan's book is him describing how he grew up and how that has personally influenced his spending, saving, and investing decisions. He talks about how his dad was an ER doctor, a job that was incredibly stressful to him. So stressful that at a certain point in his life, he just decided to quit and go do something else. And his dad was able to do that because his parents were extremely frugal about saving. And the power of that kind of independence really stuck with Morgan. Quote, "We're so far committed to the independence camp that we've done things that make little sense on paper. We own our house without a mortgage, which is the worst financial decision we've ever made, but the best money decision we've ever made. I don't try to defend this decision to those pointing out its flaws or those who would never do the same. On paper, it's defenseless, but it works for us. We like it. That's what matters. Good decisions aren't always rational. At some point, you have to choose between being happy or being right." I love that so much. And if I could just go off on a tangent here for a second, this is what drives me nuts about Dave Ramsey. Probably not where you thought we were going, but go ahead and climb aboard. Dave Ramsey gives all kinds of advice, and a lot of it is fine, but some of it, according to all the research I've seen, is objectively suboptimal. You should never ever use credit cards. You should stop investing in retirement funds while you're paying off debt. And 8% is a perfectly safe withdrawal rate. The data is just not on his side with really any of those recommendations. But here's the thing. There's a world where any of those options totally make sense. If you don't like how you spend on a credit card, then don't use a credit card. If you are craving the freedom and the accomplishment of getting out of debt and you want to do that as fast as you sustainably can, then sure, you can stop funding your 401k for a while. And if you're okay with accepting a higher amount of risk in retirement in exchange for more money available to you sooner, that's great. I don't care. And what drives me banana Hannafafana about Dave is that he refuses to acknowledge that this is just how he likes to do it. This is just what he's seen work for some people. For some reason, you're expected to take those pieces of advice as gospel, as the way to do it. And then you have a bunch of other people who are trying to get views on TikTok or whatever coming in being like, no, that's actually stupid. If you do that, you're a big dummy. And it's like, neither of these things is helping the conversation. The question is, what works for you? When you have all the information, what feels the most like the way you want to live your life, the way that is going to jive best with your personality and your circumstances and all that? One of my favorite things about what we do here at YNAB is just equipping people with questions that allow them to reflect inward. Instead of asking, like, what percentage of my money should be going to housing or groceries, you're asking, what does my money need to do before I get paid again? What goals, big or small, do I personally want to save for? When I look at my spending plan in YNAB, am I happy with it, or do I want to change it to reflect something that's coming up or a new priority that I have? There is so much like telling and telling and telling in personal finance, and not enough just like asking questions. And I love that this book is prompting you to do that instead of just going, here's my 9-step process. Okay, that's enough of the man from Tennessee. Let's get back to the man from Houseltown. I don't know where Morgan Housel lives. Quote, an idea exists in finance that seems innocent, but has done incalculable damage. It's the notion that assets have one rational price in a world where investors have different goals and time horizons. He asked the question, what's a good price for you to pay for Google stock today? If you read The Motley Fool and other investing stuff, you'll kind of get this just generic advice of just like, oh, this is going down, but it's going to go up and blah, blah, blah. But Morgan says, well, hold on. What game are you playing? Are you planning to cash in that stock in 30 years or 30 minutes? Because that is going to change what price sounds good to you. He mostly talks about this in terms of investing, but I think this same advice is really important when we think about spending and the advice we get around it. If you are a tech employee who's 29 and wants to retire at 35 so you can travel the world, you're playing a very different game than someone who's a 35-year-old school teacher that wants to set their 3 kids up for success, or someone who wants to quit their job and start their own business. If the school teacher is looking to the tech employee who wants to retire early for advice on what they ought to do with money, well, that tech employee is playing a very different game than the school teacher. We assume that because we're all using money, we must all be playing the same game, but we're just not. I think this is especially important when we think about things like savings goals. Do you really want to buy a house? Is that really important to you? Or do you just want to do it because people are screaming equity at you all the time? Do you really want to cut back on a bunch of stuff to get out of debt as fast as you possibly can because that sense of freedom and all that freed up money is really important to you? Or do you want to pay off debt at a slower rate so that you can have more experiences while you're younger? It's so easy to talk about what you should do in response to those questions, but what you should do depends on the game you're playing. So obviously there's a lot I like in this book, but that doesn't mean that I totally agree with everything. There is one chapter in particular where I feel like Morgan and I are kind of on different wavelengths, and it's his chapter about saving. In a later chapter titled Wealth is What You Don't See, Morgan Housel talks about how we often think that someone driving a fancy car is wealthy, but having fancy stuff isn't really an indicator of wealth. You might have a fancy car because you're wealthy, or you might have a fancy car because you took out a big loan in order to get a fancy car. Wealth is financial assets that haven't yet been converted into the stuff you see. When most people say they want to be a millionaire, what they might actually mean is, I'd like to spend $1 million. And that is literally the opposite of being a millionaire. That is all technically true, and yet I think the emphasis here feels weird to me. When people say they want to be a millionaire, they actually mean, I'd like to spend $1 million. Well, yeah, like, isn't that kind of reasonable? Like, I'm not saying you should spend all million of the dollars all at once, because then you would have $0, but I don't know that I just want to have $1 million. I want to turn $1 million into all kinds of things that make my life and the lives of other people better, right? Obviously, keeping some of that money to spend at a later date when I need it for emergencies or whatever, that's very smart. But I do ultimately intend to spend it in some way. And then when we get to the actual chapter on saving, Morgan says something that just doesn't really sit right with me. Everyone needs the basics. Once they're covered, there's another level of comfortable basics. And past that, there's basics that are both comfortable, entertaining, and enlightening. So far, yeah. But spending beyond a pretty low level of materialism is mostly a reflection of ego approaching income, a way to spend money to show people that you have or had money. Think of it like this, and one of the most powerful ways to increase your savings isn't to raise your income, it's to raise your humility. When you define savings as the gap between your ego and your income, you realize why many people with decent incomes save so little. It's a daily struggle against instincts to extend your peacock feathers to their outermost limits and keep up with others doing the same. Now, on one hand, I kind of agree with this, that in general, spending money just so other people know that you have money probably isn't worth just having the money or spending it on something else. But I'm just not sure about the statement that savings is the gap between your ego and your income, and the way that you save is by raising your humility. And this feels like it comes a little bit out of nowhere with Morgan, and some of it makes me wonder if it's just kind of his view on the world. Because on the one hand, like, he works with a venture capital firm, so when he talks about a pretty low level of materialism, it could be that he's thinking of something that is a higher amount of spending than what I'm thinking of. But then again, when I read his more kind of autobiographical chapter, it sounds like he and his wife are into very kind of frugal activities, which he admits in that chapter won't work for everyone. So maybe there's something about his personal perspective that gives him this idea, but I just don't buy it. I'm sure it's true for a lot of people, and it may be more true of most of us than we think. That was a very Bilbo sentence. But I just don't personally buy that your saving rate is the gap between your income and your ego. Maybe your expenses are really high because everyone you care about lives in a very expensive area. Or maybe you're saving less right now because you're prioritizing investing in certain kinds of experiences while you're younger, or while your kids are a certain age, or something like that. I feel like there's a lot of reasons people's savings rates may not be quite as high. Some of them are structural, and some of them are just personal priorities. I'm going to give Morgan the benefit of the doubt here, but it is just kind of a weird bit of sort of moralizing language in a book that otherwise tends to do a good job of not turning financial decisions into issues of personal character. He also talks quite a bit about how you don't need a particular goal with your savings. You can just save money for the purpose of flexibility and options. And at YNAB, we do encourage doing that. That's kind of the whole mentality behind getting a month or more ahead, is to give yourself just more options and flexibility and breathing room when stuff goes wrong. But I think, and we've seen, that there also can be a lot of power in naming the things you are actually saving for and breaking those big, larger, less frequent expenses down into smaller chunks. It gives you permission to spend savings dollars on things that you actually need to spend savings dollars on. It makes big saving goals less daunting. And I think in general, for a lot of people anyway, it just gives you a lot more clarity. And you can have both. Because while Morgan emphasizes over and over that you need to save money because anything can happen, you also need to save some money because some things are definitely going to happen. Your car is going to break. You are going to need to go to the doctor at some point. And I think there is some power in getting actual clarity around those things and breaking them down into smaller kind of monthly goals. But at the end of the day, it's whatever's reasonable for you. This is the first book I have reviewed for this channel where I can say 100% that this is spendful. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I mean, if you want to align your money towards the things, the causes, the people that you really care about, and get rid of that kind of second guessing that can be so prevalent in how we spend our money, this book is going to give you some great insights on how to do that more effectively and find a way that works for you. Bonjour.